So we got to definitely look at old versus new here. We've got the 2022 GR86 and the current car that you can buy today that's going to be replaced obviously by this new car. And there have been a whole host of changes within the vehicle. And it's kind of the normal stuff you'd expect, especially from a performance vehicle where it's all this incremental, things that if you look at them by themselves don't seem like a lot, but when you add them all up together can make a pretty big difference in how the car feels and how it performs. And I think that's the case here. We're going from a 2-liter engine up to a 2.4-liter engine. And of course, that's a pretty big change, and that makes a big difference in torque, it makes a big difference in horsepower, and it changes the character of the car as well. So we're looking under the hood of the current car, and it uses a 2-liter engine, which is, of course, the Boxer Toyota collaboration with Subaru. So it's, as we all know, a Subaru engine, but built with Toyota's blessing and put into these Toyota vehicles. And this 2-liter engine has 205 horsepower at 7,000 RPMs, of course, naturally aspirated. And the torque number is 156 pound-feet at over 6,000 RPMs. And so this thing was a screamer. You had to wring it out, to really get it to go anywhere. And it means that it was a lot of fun to drive, but it also maybe on the road could be a bit tedious because that meant lots of downshifts with the car to get it to go up the hill, to get it to pull away from the light or whatever the case may be. So this is the 2-liter engine. Of course, now we've gone up to this 2.4-liter. And remember, the increase is not with stroke, it's actually with bore, so bigger pistons in diameter. And that has done some interesting things. So the horsepower jumps up, still at 7,000 RPMs, but now goes to 228 horsepower. And the torque number goes up to 184, but instead of it being at over 6,000 RPMs for max torque, it's at 3,700 RPMs. And so the drivability difference is actually pretty amazing, where genuinely out on the track, for example, which is a great way to test it, there are corners where I need to be in second gear in the current car with the 2-liter car that I can easily do in third gear with the 2022 GR86. So that's a good back-to-back comparison of how just simply the engine, with its different character, with its different torque curve, because it's been bored out and gone to a 2.4-liter engine, has really given the vehicle more flexibility. Now, the thing I'll add to that, because I was worried, and maybe you're thinking the same thing right now, I was like, oh no, if the torque is really low, is it as much fun to rev it up on the track? The answer is absolutely yes. Remember, the peak horsepower is still at 7,000. So I was, my fault, but I was bumping into the rev limiter all the time in the manual transmission car, even though it's beeping at me, warning me, because it's pulling so well through that, last 6,000 to 7,000 RPM range. So it's a fun little engine and a truly big upgrade. I think all of us were hoping for a turbocharger or a supercharger or something. We ended up with a bigger naturally aspirated engine, but I'll tell you that this thing is a lot of fun to drive, especially on the racetrack, and definitely more flexible to drive on the road. When we start looking, more towards the performance of the car from a suspension standpoint, there's some big upgrades that have happened across the board with the vehicle that make it feel much, much more stable at speed. And a lot of it has to do, and it's the same kind of thing you hear almost every time a manufacturer redoes a car, they make the chassis stiffer. And so this thing indeed has a stiffer chassis than it did, and there's bracing all over the place within the car. It still has the same strut braces, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the actual unibody itself being beefed up, and they're talking about using more high-strength steel, especially in the back structure of the car. And what they're trying to do is avoid torsional twisting. I know it's maybe hard to imagine that cars do that, but they do, especially with modern tires. You put a Michelin Pilot 4S on a car and it can generate, over a G of cornering force, and that's more than enough to actually wind a car up torsionally, and that makes them let go when you're driving it through a corner. If you've ever felt a car kind of abruptly oversteer or abruptly understeer, whenever anything like that, when a car breaks loose like that, that's a wind up and a release of the chassis under load. And so when you're stiffening the car up, you're basically letting the suspension do the work. And so you get to corner harder, that's great. But the other thing is the vehicle becomes more predictable at the limit where it's not winding up and releasing anymore. It's staying more as a, a nice solid piece. And now the suspension and the tire is breaking away more gradually, and the vehicle just becomes more fun to drive and faster at the same time. So again, just all sorts of things that have been done, even though we're still talking about a McPherson strut and we're talking about a multi-link rear suspension. Big changes between how these cars are actually put together make this car much stronger and therefore more fun to drive than that one. Big changes in the interior, and that's kind of one of the fun parts too. When we talk about, yeah, they did add 75 pounds to the car and all of that, and you can look at that as being a negative, and it certainly is. We'd love them to have done everything with carbon fiber and saved the weight and made the car even lighter. But remember, again, we're talking about a car that starts out at, as they're saying, it should stay about the same as the old car, which is under $30,000 point of entry. So when you're seeing Alcantara in the car, in the premium package, and we have it even on the seats. Everything is leather that you're touching, from the handbrake to the shifter to the steering wheel itself. You've got the nice brushed aluminum pedals on the premium car. I mean, this is kind of cool stuff. Again, at this price point, it gives you a real feel of quality. And of course, within the car itself, we've got a bigger center screen. We've got new controls for the HVAC system. We've got controls for the track mode, the different modes here, because this is an automatic transmission car, and because it's a premium car, it has heated seats, and those are the controls for the heated seats. And of course, 2022 with an automatic, you get paddle shifters, so that's kind of a nice addition instead of just having to shift it manually down here on the shifter itself. And then the big change in the interior, besides the redesign, the styling, the Alcantara, is you get a nice display there instead of analog gauges, and it's pretty cool because you can just kind of put it into track mode if you want to. Changes the gauge design. You can have G-force displayed. You can have your coolant temperature, your oil temperature, all of that stuff up there for track day usage. And it also has a track timer that you can use. So that's one of the advantages of going away. I love analog gauges. I'm a guy that remembers like Smith and Jaeger gauges that you have in old Jags and Lamborghinis and Ferraris and things like that. But I have to admit, these newfangled screens definitely give you a lot of flexibility and give you the ability to really customize the car and give you all sorts of options that you never would have had with analog gauges. So of course, we're all familiar with the outgoing 86, and it's been a great car, and styling wise it was always an attractive car, especially, again, I keep saying this, at the price point that it's at. But it's pretty cool when you kind of pan back and take a look at the 2022 car. You see just a whole different level, as far as the little G-shaped grille inserts here, of course our GR badge, our front splitter, everything kind of takes on a more modern look. And to me, as a whole, this thing kind of does look, as far as a family resemblance, more like the Supra. And remember, that's what we're talking about here. This is kind of like the baby. You've got the two Supras. You've got the 4-cylinder Supra that starts at about 40 grand, so that's about $10,000 more in this. And then you've got the 6-cylinder Supra, which is more like around $60,000. And this car, coming in, here's another rear-wheel drive. Get it with a manual transmission, naturally aspirated engine, ultra-low center of gravity due to that boxer engine. Fantastic driving dynamics. I mean, driving dynamics you can compare to cars that cost 2, 3, 4 times the price tag of this thing. And that makes it a lot of fun and a great entry-level sports car. So maybe the answer to any question that's asked is not always buy a Miata. Maybe it should be buy a GR86.